tuned to Longevity Lifestyle Designs. This is Zach with secretsoflongevity.com. Today's video has been requested for by many people, sort of indirectly. I get a lot of questions around herbs and how to work with them, and so I wanted to make this as a really easy reference to send people to, and just share my knowledge with my viewers, you guys, so that you can understand sort of the four main ways that you can work with whole herbs. Now, if you're buying capsulated herbs or straight powder, such as the ones sold at Hyperion Herbs, you obviously don't need to follow any of these steps because the process has already been undertaken, where the herb has had the constituents extracted from it and put into a easily usable form. So if you have the powder, don't try and make a tea out of it in terms of boiling it for a long time. It won't damage it actually if it's already been an herb that's been boiled to have the qualities extracted, but it's just a waste of your time and unnecessary. If you have capsules, of course, you just need to take those and swallow them with water. But if you have whole herbs, there's, like I said, four things you can do. Number one is tincturing herbs. I think the best resource for tincturing herbs is going to be a program that my friend Brandon Damon created called Tincture Control. If you want to check that out, you can click the link below this video. So there's a drop down menu, you just click the downward pointing arrow, it'll drop down, you can find that. And that'll take you to the page just to learn about what the program entails. But this is a way of really learning every aspect of tincturing that you need to know if you want to make that a regular way that you consume your various herbs that you might have on hand. So there's a lot of specifics in that program that are beyond what you can just simply find on the internet, sort of the basic, like throw herbs in a jar and put alcohol over it and let it sit for 2 weeks. That's sort of the really quick, basic rundown of how to make a tincture, but there's a lot other more finer details you can learn in this program to really master the art of tincture making. And I actually also did make a video about it, and I just sort of go over those vague points as well. Didn't reveal everything, obviously, because that's within Brandon's program if you want to check that out. But at the end of this video, I also link to that two-part series I did on 3 tinctures I made actually just earlier this year, and I used them to give as Christmas presents. So that leaves 3 ways of preparing herbs, and I'm going to demonstrate one way of those 3, but they're all involving water decoctions. So again, with tincturing, if you weren't using alcohol, you could use vinegar. You can also use glycerin, and there's other substances you can use that have that sort of acidic quality that pulls out the oil soluble. Actually, with the case of glycerin, it's only water soluble constituents, but those can all be applied to the idea of tincturing, where you're letting herbs sit in a solution for a long period of time. With water, it's a much shorter process, but can vary from a few minutes to a few hours in terms of how long they sit in the water for. So we've got basically just 2 broad ways of dealing with herbs and water. Number 1 is infusions, and number 2 is decoctions. And the third one would be just another form of decocting herbs, which is longer. So infusions is where you pre-boil water on a stove top. This is basically what most people do when they make tea. If they're making it with a tea bag that they bought at a health food store or even a mainstream grocery store. You buy these tea bags, whether it's black tea, green tea, some sort of herbal tea, floral tea, fruit tea. You take the tea bags, you put them in a pot, and you pour a boiling water over it, you let it sit for up to 5 minutes or so, then you pour it. That's very basic, and you're going to end up with a pretty weak tea, and it's going to, especially with tea bags that have been sitting on a shelf, it's going to be very low quality herbs that have really degraded from being exposed to oxygen, being exposed to light. Even through those cardboard boxes, there's light rays that get to them, and it's just not really a good way of learning how strong herbs can be and how much they can affect your health and well-being when you compare it to real infusions, which is where you take a really fresh, whether it is dried or even fresh in terms of just being picked and still has all its moisture in it, but when you take a fresh herb in that sense and put it, maybe like an ounce of the herb, which could be like a small palmful or a medium-sized palmful, into, say, a mason jar or a teapot, and you pour boiling water over it and you let it sit for a few hours, really. So if you put it into like a thermos, and if it's a mason jar or a teapot, you want to wrap it in a towel or with a tea cozy to really keep it hot for longer, so that the water and the heat from the water really has a long time to pull these things out of the herbs. You can also, if you have a teapot, put tin foil to really hold in even the steam, and that's getting really finicky kind of, but that is the traditional way with infusions, is to really completely seal off all exits for the hot water. So if you have a mason jar, that's a really easy way to do it, is you put your herbs at the bottom, you pour the just boiled water over it. In some cases with green tea you can get into specifics of like the water has to have not reached boiling, and then you let it sit for a minute before you pour it over, because there's a specific temperature you need for that. And yes, you can get into that kind of specifics for different types of herbs, but that's way beyond what most people are prepared to do at the moment. So I'll just keep it simple. And basically, you have water that you've just boiled, you pour it over your herbs, you screw on the lid if it's a mason jar, and then you wrap it in a towel and you let it sit. If you do that at night and you let it sit overnight and you get out to it in the morning, it might still even be slightly warm and it's ready to drink, but it's going to be really dark, really rich brew. You want to strain it off first, obviously, and throw away the leftover herbs. With an infusion that strong, there's not going to be much left in the herbs, so it's not worth a second boil. So you have that ready, and you consume that over the course of the day. It's 1 liter of really strong herbal tea. You obviously can make it in different amounts or portions as well, but that's a really good practice some people can get into. But with that type of infusion, or any type of infusion, you're really only going to want to do this if you're using leaf herbs, fruits herbs, or floral herbs. Now, even with a floral herb, you're probably going to want to do an extremely light infusion, where you don't want to have the water having just boiled so much. You want like a pretty low temperature water, and you can even get into sun teas and things like that. You can even say that might be the fifth way of making tea, is just to put some herbs in room temperature water and put it on the windowsill. And that way you're preserving, if it's a floral herb or it's certain other types of herbs that do disperse well into water even without it having been boiled. That's a way of getting those constituents into the water if you want to keep it raw. But for the most part, even leaves and dark greens like that do benefit from that freshly boiled water being poured over them, which really breaks open the cell walls and pulls out the medicinal compounds you want to have access to. So like I was saying, those light herbs, such as the greens, leafy components of plants, the fruits of plants, the flowers of plants, those can all be done in infusions, because you don't want to have a long-term boil happening as you would with a decoction. Now, a decoction is when you have herbs in a pot, such as this, or a smaller pot if you're doing a smaller quantity, and you're letting them boil on a low simmer for a period of time, anywhere from 20 minutes to 30 minutes to 40 minutes to 2 hours to a full day. One way to also do this is use a crock pot, if you can get that onto like a really low boil, or even just below boil if it is certain roots, and you're leaving that out all day. It will really extract everything from them that you want to get access to. So a decoction is going to be more for the denser herbs, such as roots, stems, barks, and mushrooms. So with the tree mushrooms, the polypores, that's going to go into that sort of fourth category I was talking about, which is the very long decoctions. So most herbs that would fall into sort of the root, stem, and bark category would only need 40 minutes max to get everything out of them you need. But with pretty much all the mushrooms, you want to be going for 2 to 3 to 4 hours in terms of how long they decoct for. So that's chaga mushroom, reishi, any of these hard polypore mushrooms. There are sort of softer polypore mushrooms that you could probably decoct for shorter periods of time, but the two main ones people are encountering these days is reishi and chaga. And both of those you should at least be doing 2 hours in a nice boil. Again, you can use the same type of pot you would for any other type of decoction, but you just want to simmer it for longer, and make sure you come and check on the water levels, because you might need to top it up, and then bring up the heat to make it boil again, and bring it back down to a simmer. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I'm going to make a decoction that's sort of around the 30 to 40 minute mark. I'm going to have a few things in there that would need a slightly shorter decocting time, but that's alright. There's still, if there is anything that's damaged from the heat, they're going to be in that heat, so they're going to be damaged anyways, even if it was a shorter time. But when we're using herbs like this, we don't need to get caught up in if we're losing nutrients or not, because we're focusing on the medicinal compounds of what we're extracting into the water. We're not focusing on proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, which do get altered by heat in certain ways. So it's the minerals, the vitamins, the phytochemicals, the various other medicinal compounds that are found in these plants that do get released into the water, and in some cases actually get activated by the heat. So don't be afraid of boiling your herbs or pouring boiling water over them and thinking that's cooking them, because that is something that is traditionally the way that we get the proper nutrients from these herbs. Hey, we'll get back to the main topic of this video in just one moment. I wanted to let you know, however, that if you're really enjoying this video, or perhaps you're a regular subscriber, and you'd like to see me continue making regular postings on this channel, Secrets of Longevity, or perhaps even increase the frequency of these postings, of these well-researched videos, and even the articles on my site, I would really appreciate any contribution you're able to make to support me through any of the affiliate links listed below. There's a menu bar that you simply click and it pops down. If you're watching this on another platform other than YouTube, you can double-click this video and it'll take you to YouTube, where you can then click this bar that will pop down to give you these links. So like I mentioned, there's affiliate links. These are all companies I highly recommend and purchase for myself, and I get a percentage of anything that you purchase through these links, and that obviously would support me. And then there's also a link to a donation page on my site where you can make a PayPal donation, and you can also set up a phone consultation if that's something you're interested in doing. So with that, we're going to get back to the video, and thank you for any support you're able to give to me. So my herbal formula that I'm going to be doing is largely a Chinese herbal formula. Not any one specific from a text or an old pharmacopoeia. It's just something I have on hand. I've got a bunch of herbs, I'm going to put them in there. And I do have an intent in mind, and that's something that you can do if you're working with herbs, is to have an intent when you're setting up either a tincture or a decoction or an infusion of what you want to be getting from this. So if you're working with a single herb, it can be pretty obvious if you know the constituents and qualities of that herb. But when you're starting to mix things together, you're going to get synergistic effects, and you want to start to use your intuition, if you are familiar with them, as to how you put it together to get the results you're wanting to get. And it takes time to work with different herbs to really get the feel of what they're going to do for you, and as well as working with them in combination. But when you're working with tonic herbs, which are very safe to take and safe to experiment with, that's when you're going to learn what works for you the best and what's going to give you the results you want. So to learn more about tonic herbs, I do have other articles on the topic. I got a link below. There's a long list of tonic herbs from various places in the world, but of course tonic herbs are just much more vast than that fairly small list that's on that page on my site. You can check out books like Adaptogenic Herbs is one that comes to mind. I forget the author's name. Of course, Ron Teagarden has a few books out. Just look up his name and look up any books written by him. He has one called Chinese Tonic Herbs. That's obviously focused on the Chinese system, but again, there's the Ayurvedic system with the Rasayana herbs, which are the equivalent to tonics. There's tonic herbs in North American herbalism, both Western sort of doctor-based herbalism as well as the Native American herbalism. And that's a little more vague. There's definitely things like American ginseng, nettle leaf and nettle root, and slippery elm bark, which are all herbs that are tonic in nature. And there's more than that, but it's just less well known in North America as to how well researched they were in China for the tonic qualities, which are herbs that can be consumed over the long term without negative side effects, and being able to consume them daily without causing imbalances in the body. So we've got 3 liters of spring water in here. I really highly recommend only using spring water to make decoctions and infusions with when you're working with herbs, even tinctures, using a really good quality alcohol that, if you can't find it, is made with spring water. Obviously, when it's been distilled that many times, if you're using grain alcohol, it's not going to be as important what it was originally made out of, because it's so pure by the end. But when working with water, you want to use a good quality spring water. And the best place to find a spring near you is obviously findaspring.com. Many people are familiar with that site. I'll link that below as well. So we're going to put 3 astragalus root pieces. This is a Chinese root that, as you can see, it's a root that's been cut lengthwise into these thin strips, almost look like tongue depressors. It is a very mild qi tonic, which works on the lung yang, has certain properties that affect the jing as well, But overall, it's a very good herb for strengthening the Wei Qi, which is the immune system that runs beneath the surface of the skin. Personally, I like to liken it to the lymph system. It's obviously not exactly identical to the lymph system, but there's a lot of immune cells in our lymph system. The white blood cells are housed, in some cases produced in certain parts of our lymph system. So it strengthens that and strengthens our ability to stay warm. And it's a great herb for the winter, right getting up to the start of winter. And it can also help prevent wind damage from windy conditions. And we're in the spring, and I think I could just benefit from it because it's going to sort of offset a lot of the really heavy, dense Jing energy we're going to be building with this whole formula. So the next thing I'm going to put in is some Ho Shou Wu. This is my all-time favorite herb, has been for a long time. I've talked about it in many videos and articles in the past, so I've got links below to an article I've written. I also have a two-part video on YouTube here. You can just simply search Ho Shou Wu, and mine comes up there near the top, if not the first two. And that's a very popular video that I've made. And I'll also link to it at the end of this video if you just want to click that link. So I'm going to do one big handful, but add a little bit more because that handful wasn't as big as I'd like it to have been. I get a lot of these herbs either through Chinatown in Toronto. There's a great place called Sunming Hong. If you live in the Toronto area, you can check that one out. It's on Dundas Street. Otherwise, I highly recommend getting them from Mountain Rose Herbs, which is pretty much all organic or wildcrafted herbs. So you can check that link below and order any of the herbs you see here that I'm using. Some of them won't be there, but over half of them will be. Especially the Ho Shou Wu, that one's on there. It's a great one. Very high in zinc. This is what we would call a yin jing tonic herb that strengthens sort of that really basal quality energy that gives us the deep sleep, deep rest, deep rejuvenation, and keeps us probably the most youthful out of any of these herbs. The next herb I'm going to use is Romania. I'm going to put 2 of these pancake-like patties in there. So I can tear these out, so they're a little sticky. So it's been pre-prepared in a black bean sauce. I'm not sure what the original root looks like. I've never seen it whole like that, but it's basically packed flat, and it's got an interesting flavor. I sometimes eat these just as is, but what they'll do is they'll sort of add a vague sweetness to any tea you put these in. Definitely really darkens the color, and in Chinese medicine, and in Chinese herbalism, the really dark and almost black herbs are the ones that are the most Jing building. So this is another yin Jing tonic. Really good for the spleen, good for the kidneys, good for the whole sexual system and libido, which is the quality of Jing. And next I'm going to put in a few pieces of poria, which is a mushroom that grows in symbiotic relationship to, I believe it's a certain type of pine tree in China. And it is very drying to the spleen, which helps offset some of the effects of the dampness of some of the yin Jing tonics. I'm going to put another one. It gets rolled up in these little tubes. That's where, that's how it's usually found in Chinese herb shops. But this also has a yin Jing quality to it. Next we're going to put in some Eucommia bark, which is a yang Jing tonic. It's got a very interesting quality to it. I'll show you up close here. It's got almost like a spidery web type substance. It's related to the rubber tree in Cambodia where they harvest rubber from. It's almost like spider web like filaments that are in the bark or in between certain layers of the bark, and it's said to be very strengthening to the ligaments and joints, and you can almost think of that quality of that fiber being related to that quality within our body, and that's sort of how the Chinese saw it affecting that area of the body. Now this, I believe it's a fairly not as common herb, so it's a little higher priced in Chinese herb shops, but still by Western standards it's pretty cheap. So I usually buy a few boxes, a few pounds of it whenever I go. I'm in Toronto, in the area where I pick up this herb. In terms of dosage of using herbs, with tonic herbs it's not quite so important specific dosage-wise. You can get into using a scale, like an electronic scale, and get a good resource that talks about tonic herbs and can talk about dosage, and you want to make formulas with the correct dosages. And if that's something you're drawn to doing, definitely do that. However, you have to buy this electronic scale, or perhaps you have one that can work on your counter, but I don't have one of those, so I just go by handfuls. And it's, again, these are tonic herbs, so they're not that dangerous to use, and if I use a little more than would be optimal, that's okay. If I use a little less, that's fine too. Certain herbs you do want to use less of. One is schizandra berries, but schizandra berries are very strong herbs. They're called the 5-flavor fruit, and they have very sour and peppery flavor to them. I find personally is the most dominant, but they are said to have sweet and pungent, and the other ones that are in the Chinese system, they've got 5 flavors that they relate. Salty is another one that you can taste in there. And it's very beautifying. Personally, I like it in combination with a lot of other herbs. I don't like doing too much of it personally because it does have well, it has that quality of retaining fluids, which is great for anyone looking to retain seminal fluid. If you are engaging in a partner, it does have a tendency to increase sexual sensitivity to the genitals. So if in males, that might lead to premature ejaculation if you're really sensitive to your partner's touch. However, in females, which is this is traditionally used by females, it is great for them if they have trouble having enough sensitivity, or if they want to take that sensitivity to another level, because it really sort of has some effect on the nerves in that area, but it does also help retain fluid, so there's not excessive leaking of jing out through the genitals in that way. Generally, for dosage, you only want to do a teaspoon of schizandra. I'm going to do about a tablespoon because I'm doing such a large amount. I've got 3 liters of water. I'm going to consume this over a few days. So that was about a tablespoon I added there. Because it's such a strong herb, you really don't need that much, and it does have that ability to permeate a drink and really give you all those qualities from just such a small amount there. We're going to add another chi tonic to this, and this is Cardenopsis, which has qualities somewhat similar to ginseng, but nowhere near as aggressive. We're going to put a small handful in, maybe a bit more. This is good for this time of year when we're sort of waking up, at least in my area, we're just sort of getting to the place of, actually a few weeks ago we didn't need a jacket. It was really sunny. I was out sun tanning, but we're back to very cold. It even snowed at one point a week and a bit ago, so we're just on the verge of getting into spring here. I know some people are really sort of feeling like they already have summer if you're sort of more towards California, or you live somewhere else in the southern U.S. But chi tonics can be good at that time of year where you're needing sort of that boost of energy just to get you out of that sort of bogged down feeling after a really hard winter, perhaps. We're going to add yet another chi tonic, which I'm not going to add too much of because it's a very strong herb. It is American ginseng. Now, this you're going to want to fish out of your pot afterwards because you can eat this and get the full effect of it. To make sure you're getting everything, it almost like swells up when you boil it, and if you eat it, it's kind of like eating, to me it's like the texture of potato, but it obviously has the ginseng flavor. And I always pull these out afterwards and eat those just so I'm not missing out on any qualities that are in this. It's a fairly pricey herb. I got this organic, $28 a pound, so that is more than $4 a pound for something like Kush Wu, where I live. So I'm putting 3 largish roots in there. Like I said, it's a chi tonic. It is also a lung yin tonic, so it's a good thing to go in combination with astragalus, that it's, if you're wanting to really boost the health of your lungs, it's going to hit both yin and yang aspects of it. So it's really good for the skin in that sense, because it's, I used it at one point when I had eczema on my face a number of years ago. I used it with a few other herbs, and in combination with some other lifestyle strategies, and I actually reversed and eliminated those symptoms. I think the American ginseng was a key component to that, because it really helps clear the lungs and open them up from a sort of foundational standpoint, that yin basal energy. I've got 2 more things I'm going to add, but I'm not going to add these until it's already on the stove top boiling away, probably about halfway through. I've got some cardamom seeds, which I'll add in just a few now because they have such strong fragrant oils as a spice. I don't want it to all get boiled away, because the essential oils will just literally boil away and you will have lost anything you put in there. But if you put it in with like 15 to 20 minutes left, you're going to sort of permeate the whole tea with that, and it's going to have a very nice quality to it. I've also got a bag of horny goat weed here, then I'll add in maybe a couple of tablespoons of it. It's a green leafy herb, and like I was saying, you don't want to boil these for too long because they're not only meant for an infusion type setting. But we're going to add this to this decoction, but we're just going to do it later on in the whole process. The other thing I do and recommend for people to try out is to do a second boil on decoction such as this. With the infusion, you want to throw the herbs after the first time because there's really not going to be much left over in them. With the long decoctions with the mushrooms, that can be beneficial to do them a second time, just as you would with the decoction with these various herbs and roots. I'm going to probably have it on the stove for 40 minutes, or maybe half an hour to 40 minutes the first time, but definitely on the second time 40 minutes or even 45 minutes just to get all that extra stuff. And if you want, you can do them both one after the other and combine them into another pot, and you just have sort of like an equally strength of these two decoctions that you've mixed together, and consume that over, a couple of days. You don't want to make too much of a decoction available because you want to consume it in 3 to 4 days max. If you go beyond that, you're going to start having possibly a fermentation happening in your tea. If you've been good about keeping it in the fridge and not leaving it out, that might be extended to a week. If you've got antiviral herbs in there or antifungal, antibacterial herbs, it could last even longer. You might even be able to leave it out and nothing happens. So things like chaga, pau d'arco, castor claw, if you have those in your tea, it will probably be able to be left out and not go bad for quite a while. But for the most part, you want to keep your tea, if you're making a large batch of it, in the fridge and in between consuming it over the course of a few days. So a standard amount that you want to be consuming is 2 to 3 cups a day. I'll show you that once it's done and I'm drinking my first cup, but you can either drink it on its own or add it to elixirs. I've got a link below if you want to learn more about what elixirs are. It's just a great way of getting herbal teas and mixing them with nutrition in a blender format to make sort of like a new age smoothie. It's a great resource I've created to just learn about the whole process, and you can there's links to some other programs and stuff if you want to check out that art form, which is in and of itself is an interesting way of working with herbs. So here we are, we've got the stove, we just turned it on. I like gas stoves personally. It's closer to the traditional wood burning stove. That would be ideal, just in terms of the aesthetic quality of working with herbs. However, if you have an electric stove, that's by all means perfectly alright to cook herbs on. So I'm just going to let this sit here until it boils, and then once it's simmering, I'll give you guys a little peek at what's happening, and you can see me drinking it once it's finished as well. This is a good example of a good pot to do infusions in. This is a little Chinese themed pot, and as you can see, it's pretty deep, and all I do is, if I made an infusion in here, I just put some tin foil over this part here and wrap it in a towel and leave that overnight, and then pour it for myself the next day. I probably will put like 2 tablespoons of herbs in a pot that large. That's about the same size as a mason jar. It's quite a bit wider, but not quite as high. So here we are with the boiling herbs, and we're going to add a handful of the horny goatweed, otherwise known as epimedium. You can find it at the link below if you want to try that out. It's a Yongjing tonic, very notable for increasing libido. As the name suggests, it was originally seen in goats in a farmer's field. We're also going to add a few of these cardamom seed pods. I can get them out of a little package here with one hand. Just want a few of them, just a fragrance and give some flavor to this tea that will be quite pleasant. And there's about 10 minutes left on the timer for me to have this up to 40 minutes of boiling time. So here we have it, the finished tea. You can see it's very dark. I just have it in a mason jar here just so that you can see it through the glass, but I don't recommend pouring your very hot tea into glass. It can sometimes shatter and spill all over the place. So obviously a normal mug would be ideal, but I've let this cool down quite a bit and it tastes great. It's has the dominant flavor of almost like the black beanie soup kind of flavor of the Hoshibu and Romania, which have both been stewed in black beans. But I do sense the hints of sort of the more bitter things like ginseng. Definitely taste the schizandra berry sort of sourness in there. It's a very nice flavor. It's turned out quite well. I'm quite pleased with it. Cardamom's not that strong, so I would probably add a few more pods than I did in the future. and overall I'm very satisfied with it. I'm probably going to get good effects with this. So with that said, definitely check out the links below if you're wanting some more information about what types of herbs are tonic herbs. You can check out that article I said. I've got other articles posted that I mentioned throughout the video. You can always buy herbs from martin-kilgour.com. I've got a link below for that as well. That's probably the best site on the internet for getting really high quality herbs at the best price available. They can deliver them right to your door. You can buy them by the pounds. The more you buy in terms of poundage, the more of a discount you get. And yeah, definitely try some of the ones I used in this recipe. I've got links for them below as well if you want to check them out, which links to Mountain Rose Herbs. And with that said, I'm going to say take care and embrace life without limits and enjoy your herbal tea.